All right, hello everyone. So we're going to get started our next major topic, the Ottoman Empire. So those of you who are in my History of the Middle East class is going to be a huge part of our semester, the rise of the Ottoman Empire, then the fall of the Ottoman Empire. We're going to cover the rise of the Ottoman Empire before the midterm. We're talk about the fall of the Ottoman Empire after the midterm. For just anyone else who's happening watching this, the Ottoman Empire is the most significant power in the Middle East. In previous lectures, we talked about the Umayyads and the Abbasids, and they were pretty important, but the Ottomans will dominate the Middle East for the longest amount of time period and pretty much the greatest scope as well in terms of the land and the amount of land they control in the region. And so what I want to do in this first lecture is just kind of introduce you to a couple of the ideas that helped the Ottoman Empire grow and talk about a couple of the first sultans. And you will need to know the sultans of the Ottoman Empire. When I lecture on the Roman Empire, we cover about all those Roman emperors. You can't cover Roman Empire without looking at Roman emperors, and you can't cover the Ottoman Empire without learning about the sultans. So there are going to be quite a few of them you need to know. Again, for those of you who are in my class, there's a chart in your module that's going to list all the Ottoman sultans. And, here on this first slide, you have the first Ottoman, Osman, Osman from 1299 to 1326. And as always, you never need to memorize the dates. I just put the dates so you have them as reference. As long as you know circa 1300 AD and you get them all in the right order, you're going to be good. And so in terms of what allowed the Ottoman Empire to rise, I think the first thing to remember is what we talked about in our previous lecture, which was that age of invasion, right? Is we talked about all the other powers that had come into the Middle East. It kind of created a bit of a vacuum of power. The Byzantine Empire, which I'll show you in the next map here, is going to get weakened. And it really left the whole area that I'm going to show you in our map here in a second vulnerable to allow the Ottoman Empire to grow and to thrive and to become this dominant force. When you look at this image of Osman, one thing I want you to see right away, and I'll explain what this Bursa term is in the next slide as well, is he's holding a sword. And one of the characteristics of the Ottomans, you can see one of these key terms we have here, is what we call the Ghazi tradition, right? And what we mean by that is this very kind of warrior mentality, something that many of the early Ottoman sultans had. They were disciplined militarily and they were very powerful. So what exactly is Osman going to do, and how is he going to begin to expand the empire? Well, when we look at our map here again, so we have Osman again, there's his date, you got the term Ghazi tradition again, the Byzantine Empire. So for those of you who are not familiar with this, when you look at our map, everything that's kind of circled over here in red, oops, not quite perfectly, at one point was part of the Byzantine Empire, roughly, right? The Byzantine Empire was the eastern part of the Roman Empire that survived after the western part of Roman Empire had collapsed. And so as we get into about the 1200s, the Byzantine Empire was getting weaker. And in many ways, when you talk about the rise of the Ottoman Empire, they inhabit much of the same real estate, Asia Minor, Greece, part of the Balkans. So they do actually inhabit a lot of areas that are the same. And what you end up seeing is kind of the Byzantine Empire getting smaller and the Ottoman Empire getting bigger. And that's what's basically happening from about 1300 until 1453. By 1453, there's no more Byzantine Empire, and it's all the Ottoman Empire. So Osman, what's he going to do? Well, he starts to settle over here in Asia Minor. And you can kind of see over here, I'm going to highlight it, so hopefully you can see it a little better. But over here, right in Asia Minor, there's this area of Brusa or Bursa. I've seen it spelled both ways. And it's in this area that Osman begins to settle in and take the control from Asia Minor. Remember, these Ottomans are Turkish people. They come from the eastern area. They're Muslims, they're Sunni Muslims. The Byzantine Empire was, of course, a Christian civilization, specifically Greek Orthodox Christian. And so one of the other characteristics we see that allowed, or one of the events that allowed the Ottomans to take over is during those age of invasion, and the textbook in my class really explains this well, this area had become very much de-Christianized. And with the kind of lessening Christian population, it was easier for this Muslim power, these Muslim Turks, to come in, settle into Asia Minor, Anatolia, right? So this whole area over here, Asia Minor, Anatolia. And over here, they begin to settle, and that's the first step that Osman takes in order to secure some land in what is the Byzantine Empire. A couple other things we know about Osman, he's kind of seen as a man of the people. He shoed his own horse, ate with his people, and so this kind of made everybody around him feel comfortable and so forth. So that's the very beginning. In fact, Osman is we believe even the whole term Ottoman Empire is named after him. So Osman gets the ball rolling. He gets them there. He doesn't get too aggressive, doesn't bite off more than he could chew, so to speak, and he's able to now get a foothold inside of the Byzantine Empire. So now what? Well, Osman's going to die, and when he dies, he's going to be replaced by his son. And what we do see in Ottoman history is it's kind of for the most part, not always, a father-to-son inheritance system, especially in the early years of Ottoman history. So who is his son? Well, his son is named Orhan. And Orhan, as you can see here, 1326 to 1359. Again, you don't need to memorize the dates or anything. He's going to continue the expansion of the Byzantine Empire. And I hope you could see this well on the map, but if you look on this map, there's kind of two shades of green. There's this really, really darker shade right over here. That's the area of Bursa. And then there's the lighter shade, right? And the lighter shades are areas that are going to see expanding, starting with Orhan, and then, of course, other subsequent Ottoman sultans. One area is Nicaea. Nicaea is right up here as well. Maybe I'll use the red here so you can see this a little better. Right over here around the area of Nicaea. So they kind of expand further into the Byzantine Empire during the time of Orhan. One of the things that we're going to start to see is the establishment of the Janissaries, which are the military forces, the ground forces, the Safahis. Another term for my students you definitely want to know is the cavalry forces. They were effective, they were strong, and Orhan knew how to use them really well. Now, one of the things that's also going to happen under Orhan, which is going to help the further expansion of the Ottoman Empire, is the issue of Thrace. Now, where is Thrace? Well, here you can see the key word here again, Thrace. Thrace is over here, further north, just north. So again, one of the things you always want to keep track of, and I'll just kind of try to highlight it again over here, Istanbul, right? It says Istanbul on this map. At the time, it's not Istanbul. At the time, it's Constantinople still. And so Constantinople was the capital of the Byzantine Empire. It was the center of Byzantine history. It used to be known as Byzantium, then it's going to become known as Constantinople, and eventually get changed its name to Istanbul. I think there's actually some old song about that. Constantinople used to be Byzantium. I don't remember how the song goes. But anyways, so just north of Constantinople is the area of Thrace. Now, the Byzantine emperor at the time was a man named John VI, and John VI was struggling to maintain control. There was always conflicts in the Byzantine Empire. There were rivals within the Byzantine Empire for control. And kind of simplify this story for you. There's going to be a bit more detail on this, but just because this is a survey course, I just don't want to get into all the weeds, but I do want you to know some of the key information. What happens is Orhan makes a deal with John VI, and he basically tells John VI, the Byzantine emperor, I will help you control your Byzantine Empire and maintain Constantinople, but you allow me to take control of Thrace, just north of Constantinople. And they also agreed that the daughter of Byzantine Emperor John VI, his daughter Theodora, another name you see here, and if you know any Byzantine history, there's another very famous Theodora, this is a different one, she would be one of Orhan's wives. And so Orhan marries Theodora, that kind of bonds the thing together, and more importantly, Orhan now controls Thrace. Now, why is this so important? Well, if we look at our map again, what this all means is, as a result of this, we see that the Byzantine Empire is now, at least the capital, is now surrounded. The Ottomans have this area over here around Bursa and Nicaea, and now over here in Thrace. And so in the long run, this is what is eventually going to, of course, help them conquer Constantinople. The other thing I want you to know about Orhan, and this is something we've seen before, is the use of the jizya. Now, for those of you who don't know what that is, or don't remember from the previous lecture, that was the tax that was placed on non-Muslims. And so one thing that we're going to see is the Ottoman Empire is moving into more Christian territory. That what do you do with the Christian population there? And there's some Jewish population as well, but not very many, of course. The Christians and then the Jews were told, well, you are the people of the book, and therefore you don't have to convert, but if you don't convert to Islam, you do have to pay this tax. And this was kind of the way that the Ottomans used to try to, maintain some element of harmony. This is kind of a very disputed idea, the jizya. Was it right? Was it wrong? On one hand, they didn't force conversions. On the other hand, you got to pay an extra tax. On the other hand, there are some scholars who say, well, that's because in the Islamic faith, you have to pay one of the five pillars, you have to pay almsgiving or give almsgiving, and so this is a way to supplement that if you're not a Muslim. Regardless, what we end up seeing is the jizya starting to be used. All right, so Orhan's pretty important. So Osman gets the ball going. Orhan's pretty significant. One last image. This is just a quick image of the Janissaries, just to have a visual image of it. And then the question is what next? And so after Osman and Orhan, we get into our next Ottoman Sultan, who's going to be pretty important. He's actually going to be involved in a conflict, a battle that has impacts for centuries and centuries, all the way through World War I, even up to the 1990s, and even to some degree even today. So what's this next story and the next Sultan? Well, that's what we're going to cover in our next lecture. All right, hope everybody that was clear. And again, in my Middle East class, you've got your chart of Ottoman Sultans. You're going to want to know all these guys. Important folks. And if you have any questions, just let me know. Thank you. Have a great day.